Okay, and we're back, friends. Part 2 of the live streams today. Today, our topic, or I should say today, we've had a few topics. But part 2, and then I'm going to take calls, is about what's going to happen after the war. I recently uploaded a video that I talked about sort of the future of where the war is going. But what's going to happen after the war? And why do I ask this? Because in Russia, it may be hard to believe, but the intellectual crowd is already very concerned with the question of how is Russia going to live after the war in terms of living with the West. What is the West going to look like? What is the shape of things going to be? You know, especially with the final map not being determined. During Putin's big press conference, he heavily hinted that Odessa is coming home, and the various regions in the western part of Ukraine that used to belong to Romania, Poland, Hungary, if memory serves me correct, would also go back home. So, if that is the thing that's going to happen, if that's going to be the case, now the intellectually hungry among us, of the journalist, philosopher, ideologue persuasion here in Moscow are thinking about how Russia can relate to the West. And one thing you might be surprised about is that people actually here are, again, you won't believe it, but are very excited to restore relations with the West. Yeah, I know. I'm skeptical myself, but everyone is so sure. Maybe not everyone, but a lot of people are very sure that after this war ends, it's essentially going to create a sort of defining line. Kind of like how from 1945 to 1991, there was a very defined east-west line that went through the center of Europe. And I think people here are optimistic that that new line will sort of establish this is our territory, this is their territory. And we're going to be able to then negotiate based on the logic of this is on our side, and then this is on their side. But they forget that one of the problems, the reasons why we're in this horrible situation that we're in right now, is because of a complete and total disrespect for the interests of the other side. You have to remember that right before the war started in January of then 2022, the Russians basically put out their IPO, their initial public offering to the Biden side about what they think a new European security could look like. Of course, the Russians asked for a lot. They kind of basically, in a lot of ways, kind of asked, I think, them to roll back the clock to either 1997 NATO borders or earlier, something like that. Which is kind of, it's a tough ask, but they could have at least talked about it. Of course, it was unilaterally rejected, and I think that even after the war, even after there's a new line and it becomes clear who's where and all this other stuff, I think any of their attempts by Russia to do sort of the same movement, this sort of gesture of actually reestablishing, reorganizing a European security deal, it's all going to be rejected. It's going to be rejected again, and unilaterally. No points, no negotiation, no nothing. Because until there becomes a moment where the West sees Russia as either an equal in a nice sense, or an equal like a kind of competitor, kind of like how as a Cleveland Browns fan who made the playoffs, just made the playoffs by the way, you know, we're sort of born and bred to hate the Bengals and the Steelers and the Ravens. Let's just go with the Steelers. So most Clevelanders are pre-programmed to sort of hate the Steelers. But we can acknowledge that they've been very good competition. And the Steelers have beaten us many times before. So maybe on that sort of level of a sort of blood hatred yet acknowledgement of competition level equality, maybe then. But I don't think within Washington and within a lot of the talking heads and all that, and the ideologues and your globalists and other people that Alex Jones talks about, your gray cardinals lurking in dark shadows that make a lot of decisions, I don't think their mentality's changed. I think that regardless of the results of the war in Ukraine, their opinion on Russia will not change. And their attitude towards Russia, their attitude towards European security or whatever are not going to change. I don't think that it's going to have an effect on them in any real way. The only thing that could really have a deep intellectual effect on Western politics would probably be some sort of horrible economic crisis where essentially that would strip the emperor of his, the emperor was already stripped. Basically would point out that the emperor has no clothes. And I don't think that the war in Ukraine accomplishes that, right? So we always have the parable where the emperor was told that he has the most amazing invisible clothes, and only a little boy is able to point out the truth, and everyone sort of goes along with it. Yeah, your clothing's awesome while he's naked. The events that have happened thus far in the war in Ukraine, for people sitting in Russia, it looks like the emperor should have no clothes, that should be obvious to everyone in the West. But considering how much this information has been filtered and repackaged by the news and official news sources, and remember, public policy is more or less justified by the publications of the dinosaur media. So that dinosaur media wrote, I think ultimately they've sort of now weaved the tale to be like, well, the Russians just sacrificed enough human waves and human meat and conscripts, and we've kind of run out of money. Israel has gotten in the way, and it's more important. Something like that. Essentially, no one there has acknowledged that they've lost. Much in the same way that to this day, people, if you say to certain people that the United States lost the Vietnam War, oh, they wouldn't let us win. Of course we were winning, but they did, we weren't allowed to win, some sort of conspiracy that wouldn't let them do that. And it's the same thing with Russians, because whenever I talk to Russians, especially as someone with an English accent, I mentioned that Russia lost the Cold War. Flat lost. And then it starts from them, the humana. The same thing with this, well, they wouldn't let us win the Vietnam War. Well, there's this, and this, and they try to come up with all these mental gymnastics to make some sort of excuse why they didn't lose. And the people who are in power today are, let's just put it this way, vastly morally and intellectually inferior to even some of the people who make these bizarre arguments that the United States didn't lose the Vietnam War and that Russia didn't lose the Cold War. They are going to be willing to do whatever mental gymnastics they want, to have whatever sort of version of history suits them. So this idea that the Russians have that now we've proven to them that we're a real equal, and again, it goes back to the Russian inferiority complex. Look, master, look at how well we fought your troops, and we're actually just as good as you are, master. Well, I don't think it's going to change anything. I just don't. So I think that ultimately the thing that's going to happen right after the war is a new wave of Russian optimism is going to hit, that they're going to be able to sort of renegotiate something with the West and go back to having vacations on the Riviera and surfing in Cyprus or something like that. That's going to go back to that. And I think that this situation that we're in, this Russia being closed off from Europe, although in some ways as someone whose life started on the western side of the line, it would benefit me to have everything smooth out. Trust me, I'd love to go back to a time when it didn't really matter. Hey, you're a foreign guy who lives in Russia, whatever. As long as you file your taxes, bro, it's cool. Trust me, I'd love to go back to those times and go on a road trip across America or something and go see some of my relatives. But that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. So, my mental prediction timeline is somehow the war ends. Somehow there is a resolution. We have new maps about what Russia's sphere of influence looks like, what the West does. And then we are going to get to a point where the Russians think that the West will acknowledge them as equals and start to actually negotiate out a new sort of security structure like there was in 1945, 46, 47, right after World War II. And they're going to be really quickly disappointed that that's not the case. And all of the same forms of sort of destructive soft power that have taken place in the former Soviet republics are going to continue. Where are they going to continue? Well, the Baltics are almost empty of people. Each Baltic nation has very few people. I think in some ways the Baltic gas tank of hatred has been bled dry. I think the West is going to try to really push actually Moldova. We just talked in the previous bit about how, boy, the South Caucasus have been very much manipulated into the collective West's, how should we put it, soft and hard power paradigm. They're in a lot of ways lost. So that's going to definitely continue in the South Caucasus. But I think for some weird instinctual reason or based on sort of racial reasons, they're going to put their chips down on Moldova. They're really going to put their chips down because they think that, Moldova, it's just like Ukraine. We can do another cataclysmic war there. There's the whole Transnistria thing. It'll be awesome. I think that that's probably the route they're going to go. Nothing is ultimately going to change, and the financing of Russophobia or creating an anti-Russia in each one of the former Soviet republics is just going to continue on. That, again, is not going to change until something really radically changes within the West itself. And who knows when that's going to happen. I was just told by a person who's also in the know about the economic situations, let's just put it this way, globally. And that may happen sooner than we think. But until an economic or very large, deep structural change happens in the West, I think that all of the current trends are just going to continue, despite the empty optimism that Russians will have. Anyways, I'm going to take a call. Irina, you wanted to talk to me. Hello, Irina. You have an opinion. What are things going to look like after the war is over? And I am recording, but I might not be recording you. There we go. Okay, that should be good. And I see myself. Yeah, my microphone's on. Hello, Irina. You wanted to talk?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Hi, team. Do you think that when the US elites naturally pass away, because I believe they're quite old already, there will be enough people who can come and make some changes to the hostile policy?
Ooh, that's a good one. Okay, let me mute you there so I have time to think. I may have been living in Russia too long, but I'm very pessimistic. And let me explain why. So, your sort of reasoning is that there's a whole generation of cold warriors. And they have this... excuse me. I should have brought a drink. The cold warriors have one sort of way of looking at the world, and that fundamental worldview is that Russia is the great evil, okay? And that they're very used to that. You could say Lindsey Graham, John McCain, and so on and so forth. But if you kind of go down the line, let's take a look at, let's ask, hold on, how old is Anthony Blinken? How old is Anthony Blinken? Oh, he's actually 61. Wow, okay, I thought he was much younger than that. Okay, let's see. Kamala Harris. How old is she? She's also, wow, Kamala Harris looks fantastic. She's also about 60. Well, so maybe you might have something on me. I thought some of these talking heads here were closer to being in their 40s, but apparently they're not. So on the one hand, yes, people whose consciousness was formed in a post-Cold War world are not going to be quite as wrapped around the idea of the United States being freedom land versus the evil communists and this Cold War zero-sum game mentality. But, on the other hand, do you really think that the next generation of greedy ass-kissers who's coming up the chain, that they're going to somehow be more intellectually deep? Remember, even within people who are sort of against the war in Ukraine, I repeat this, listen to it when people talk. Listen when they talk. How many times will you hear someone say, not what the Ukrainians are going to do, what the Ukraines are going to do? I can even hear this from people who speak English in terms of being against the war. They don't even care to pronounce the difference between Ukrainian and Ukraine. Because fuck them. Snow monkeys. I'd like to say the snow N-words, but I'll get in trouble on YouTube. That's how the West generally sees people out here. And I think that this sort of inherent superiority attitude of the West is something that probably goes back to the Romans and the Roman Empire. And this is something that is vastly beyond a single generational change. The young people will probably have the same attitude of the West is the golden Elysium and the rest of the world is garbage. It just might not be quite so obsessed with Russia as the only opposition figure to that. But ultimately, I don't think the mentality is going to change. Like, can you find some sort of real generational difference between like politicians, like of the U.S. Congress? Let's just say, are the politicians who are in their 30s much more reasonable in terms of Russia than the politicians in their 50s or 60s? I'm not really so sure. And I think a lot of these people, again, they are just there to vote for what their campaign financiers want. And as long as we are stuck in this game of lobbyists and campaign financiers, it kind of doesn't matter how old you are. Because that's not a question of generation. You see what I mean? So, Irina, again, Lord Pessimism, or perhaps Lord Cynical, as Putin might call me. Excuse me. Ooh, sorry. These are hard to do when you're sick. But anyways, friends, I don't think it's gonna matter. It's just gonna be a slightly different flavor, but ultimately it's gonna be the same. Let's see if we have any comments. I 100% agree with Tim. Thanks, Peter. Much appreciated. But about what? Pre-war Russia requests were perfectly reasonable. Well, Peter, remember, I don't think that anyone would think that you could just roll back the security map of Europe to 1991. Why? Because remember, NATO has to keep up the facade that it's a voluntary organization and not just like a series of satellites that protect U.S. interests. So, because they have to keep up that illusion, the United States couldn't just say, okay, let's go back to 1991. All right, well, excuse me, Poland and Hungary and Romania, even though you're part of this voluntary organization, you're fired. And we're going to kick you out of this organization, even though we don't really have a bureaucratic mechanism to do it because whatever. Because that illusion that NATO is a real alliance and not satellites orbiting around the hegemon is very important. So I'm not really sure if Washington could have agreed to the rollback demands. Some of the other demands about where we're going to put nukes, who's going to be neutral or remain neutral, that stuff is a lot more open to debate. Yeah. The problem is Washington is completely disconnected from the real world and has no reverse gear. Well, yeah. And I think that that's a part of politics everywhere. Trust me, man. If you read the minor sort of day-to-day decisions that the Ghost Duma makes, you can sort of see the same thing. It's like very much politics. Again, one of the things that I think we have to solve, a philosophical issue for the 21st century is how can we have a giant room filled with hundreds of people making laws that very few of them are an expert on any given law. You've heard me do the spiel before. And then expect this to work. We have the situation that's designed for people to not be able to see the forest through the trees. That is just the way our systems are all designed, and I don't think it's good. Christopher chimes in. The big problem is the EU/Anglo-London American Empire wants to be creating an Iron Curtain, a reverse strategy which was employed in World War II. Borders closed, no direct economic connections. Well, that might happen by de facto. Like I said, I really should have brought a drink in here. Do I have anything? Do I have anything just sort of lying around? No, that's not good. The de facto situation here is that when the war ends, there's going to be a redrawing of maps. And yeah, where those redrawn lines are, that is going to be something where, acknowledge it or not, that's going to be like the sort of Russian reality versus the empire of lies. They can pretend all they want that the 1991 borders of Ukraine are coming back. They're not. That could very well happen. But in terms of like actually coming to some sort of peaceful and happy agreement that suits everyone's needs, that ain't happening. But I think you're onto something, Christopher. I do think that, yeah, it's going to remain closed. It's the same modus operandi employed for the last 200 years. Why 200 years? Did Napoleon somehow close off Russia? I'm thinking you're thinking more the real, like, closing off of Russia is more, well, the sanctions imposed on the Soviet Union right after it came into being, you could kind of see it as being that, but I think a lot of the more borders and stuff being closed and harder to access was more on the Soviet side. I don't know, 200 years seems a lot. 100 years, give or take, I could feel you on that more. But yeah, in fact, like I've mentioned in previous videos, is that I understand our American mentality, and some people might think I hate it, and trust me, the longer you live in Russia, the more you see the positives of the American mentality. And one thing we definitely like as Americans is we are good at weaving narratives and drama and visions and all that stuff. We're very good at it. And one thing that I sort of offered would be if the Russians would do the sort of elevator pitch. This was at the very beginning of the war. Think about it. We're going to divide Kiev into an east and west. It's going to be divided by the river. It's going to be just like the Cold War. There's going to be the Russian sector and the American sector. It's going to happen all over again. Because remember, you guys won the Cold War, so you have a positive memory of all that stuff. Oh, remember the American sector. Remember how you divided Germany, how awesome it was. And you're going to build back the West. And it's gonna, you could really show this vision of like you being the sucker Russian are going to be conned into giving away half of Kiev. But that's going to be able to make it like the Berlin Wall 2.0 and all this amazing stuff. I think there's a lot of people in Washington who would respond to that sort of vision and that sort of rhetoric. You see what I mean? That's speaking their language. Speaking a language of dry security concerns where, again, the United States and the West, which sees itself as the global hegemon, sees itself as losing everything and gaining nothing, that's not going to be too appealing. Anyways, some other people here are typing messages. I'm going to read maybe one or two more messages, then I'm going to have to go, guys. My voice is blowing out. I know I told you I wanted to do an episode about Russian pronunciation to help you get over that initial hump, but my voice is blowing out, and I really have to have clean audio to do that. So, anonymous comment. Must make efforts to diagnose deep down the root cause of all this. Financial greed. Maybe coupled with religious. It's similar root causes for over 100 years. The populations are not generally at fault. It's a small group of people. Must keep talking. Also about the concept of cleansing the Ukraine territory. Isn't that what's actually happening? I don't quite, you're kind of a little bit all over the place, and I don't quite know what you're getting at, but if you're saying that ultimately the geopolitics and the grand chessboard and all that stuff is really in the hands of a small few, then I agree with you. Okay? The peasantry isn't the problem. If you're talking about how Ukraine is being essentially emptied of people and what's going to happen with that, that's a topic for maybe another day. But again, yes, I mean, okay. Here we go. I just actually watched a very good short documentary, again, about the events that drove a wedge, the big wedge in Islam. And the people who are involved in this, I'm sure, really, is into the whole Shiite and Sunni thing. Because I've heard so many different versions of it, but this video is really good. And the thing is I'm sure that, especially given the time period, given the context, both sides involved really believed they were on, God's side. I'm sure. I highly doubt that either side was like, this is all a con game, baby, and we're going to kill the other side because they're suckers who believe in this nonsense. I don't think that's the case, okay? But that didn't really stop them from killing each other and and destroying the vision of having this single caliphate that's was organized through this sort of process of the caliphate sort of picking the next guy, and that there being some sort of consensus about the leadership and all that. So, I'll put it this way. Even for people who are extremely pious, and even this was near to when, the whole Islam thing really started, so you have your more passionary effect going, it still wasn't able to stop them from killing each other. And we can definitely see examples of that throughout European history and other history. Being on the same side in a religion does create strength, but it certainly doesn't guarantee peace, unfortunately. Tad is writing, the West is in deep ideological, moral, economic, and demographic crisis. They're on the path to self-destruction, and the only question that remains is, will they suck everyone else down with them to the bottom? Happy New Year's. It would seem that Russia's kind of broken free, unless due to being suckers and naive and wearing rose-tinted glasses in order to look at the West. If Russia gets suckered back into the West, it'll get dragged down. If Russia remains semi-separate or completely separate, it'll be fine. Chantel, glad to hear you're feeling better today. Enough to be live streaming. Kind of. It's more that I just need to get my schedule done. Anyways, guys, thank you for the comments. I'm glad you appreciate these live streams and my viewpoints and all that. We'll be back with you in 2024. I'm going to start making some icons, and we should have 3 new videos coming up soon. Oh my goodness.